Hi, welcome to the first episode of Living with Psychosis. Living with Psychosis is a podcast where peers and I share our lived experiences and educate listeners about what psychosis is. We share tools and advice that could be helpful for recovery and more. With me today are two of my peers and friends, Cecilia McGough and Emeka Chima from the nonprofit Students with Psychosis. Cecilia McGough is the nonprofit executive director for Students with Psychosis, a mental health activist and advocate, co-author, public speaker, former radio astronomer, and lives with psychosis. Emeka Chima is an executive board member for Students with Psychosis, mental health activist and advocate, peer support specialist, poet, musician, and lives with psychosis as well. Together, Cecilia, Emeka, and others work together to educate others and advocate for those living with psychosis across the globe. Thank you, Cecilia and Emeka, for your advocacy work. Would you like to introduce yourself and say hi?
Of course. Thank you so much, Lee, for having me on. So, hey everyone, my name is Cecilia McGough, logging in from New York City. I'm someone who is diagnosed with schizophrenia and also autism, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my lived experience.
Thank you for having me, Lee. Glad to be here. So my name is Emeka Chima, he, him pronouns. I'm logging in from the state of Gaithersburg, Maryland.
On today's episode, our topic is the stigma of psychosis. We discuss ways that the media encourages stigma, its effect on those living with psychosis, and what we as a society can do to change the way we view psychosis. What has your experience with psychosis been like?
For me, at least, I've had schizophrenia like symptoms for all of my life. I remember being very young, at the age of 4 or 5, experiencing visual hallucinations. But for me, my hallucinations and my symptoms for psychosis progressed the older that I got. My juniors and senior year at high school, my symptoms became much more prevalent with auditory hallucinations. My visual hallucinations became more prominent as well, and also different symptoms such as scattered thoughts and a certain level of paranoia. And this just snowballed into college. I don't have very many regrets when it comes to my schizophrenia psychosis journey, but I do wish that I reached out for help earlier and such, and that mental health education at a younger age would have helped me reach out earlier on, or at least know some of the terminology to help describe some of the experiences that I was going through.
My experience, I guess, it started in high school, specifically my junior year of high school. I turned 16 that fall semester, and I was portraying psychotic-like symptoms. I didn't know what was happening to me until I went to the doctor. They diagnosed me with paranoid schizophrenia. It's been a long journey with a lot of highs and lows, but I met some amazing people along the way. That's why I'm here, to share some of my lived experience with psychosis.
Thank you for sharing your story. My first time experiencing psychosis was during my sophomore year of high school during a depressive episode. During that time, my psychotic symptoms were delusions, paranoia, and visual hallucinations, such as seeing shapes and colors. But I wasn't diagnosed with schizophrenia until my sophomore year of college. I had a little bit of the same experience. It was during the pandemic. I started having some of the same delusions and hallucinations and hearing voices. After being diagnosed, I took a break from school. A month later, I was hospitalized and diagnosed with major depression. And I've been in recovery since. Throughout this journey of recovery, I've been learning what medications work for me and which don't. I've been learning to identify symptoms and when I need to reach out for help. And I've also have people in my support system. Before being diagnosed with a mental illness that included psychosis, what was your understanding of psychosis?
I don't think I had much perception around psychosis. I just knew that it was a mental illness. I didn't know what it entailed. I came to the understanding when I was in the psych ward.
When it comes to my understanding of psychosis before I got diagnosed with schizophrenia, to be honest, very, very little. I remember first hearing the word schizophrenia from watching the TV show Criminal Minds. And let me just say, not the best way to learn about schizophrenia for the first time.
I'm in that same boat. Before being diagnosed, I had little to no understanding of what psychosis was. I grew up with my mom until I was 7, and she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, but I didn't know of her diagnosis until I was a teenager. And still then, I had no understanding of what psychosis was until I was diagnosed. According to NAMI, each year 100,000 young adults experience psychosis, which means this is more common than we think. In what ways has the media been responsible or irresponsible for explaining what psychosis is?
The media has been taking responsibility, and I think they've been more and more accurate as it comes around. I know in the past people may have stereotyped psychosis in the media, but now it's becoming more and more clear what psychosis is, and more from the lived experience being partaking in the media creations. So things been accurate to an extent, much more than years ago when psychosis wasn't even a buzzword. It was just something that nobody ever thought of.
Yeah, movies that talk about psychosis in a more positive way are movies like Words on Bathroom Walls. There's also a movie called A Beautiful Mind. Both of these movies put those living with psychosis in a good light, although the movies don't portray accurate explanations of what psychosis is. They do a better job at displaying a person with psychosis better than most movies that we've probably seen, especially in horror genre or the crime genre. I know I watched 2 episodes of Criminal Minds. One episode is called Derailed, and the other is called With Friends Like These. And in these 2 episodes, the criminal in both of the episodes are diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they both have been accused of committing murders or things like hostages. And the way that they talk about the people living with psychosis gives viewers a very inaccurate view of psychosis. On an episode With Friends Like These, one of the detectives named Reed lives with psychosis as well, and also has a mother that has been institutionalized due to her illness. On this particular episode, Reed kind of feels bad for the guy who has been suspected of the murders because he also exhibits signs of psychosis. Although the show does kind of show that there's a detective who is successful living with psychosis, majority of the show frames those living with psychosis as serial killers, some type of like homicidal person. So it does more harm than justice to those living with psychosis.
You make some really good points there, Lee, that Criminal Minds definitely has different representations of people living with a schizophrenia psychosis or psychosis schizophrenic like symptoms. Yeah, the very much majority of the representation they have on that show are the criminals or the people that they are investigating and such. I very much remember that episode that you were referring to where Dr. Spencer Reed character talking to one of their colleagues, I think it was Morgan, about experiencing some of schizophrenic like symptoms and talking about their mom having a schizophrenia. And I remember that episode very clearly because I remember watching that episode, and it was one of the first times that I ever started questioning whether or not I maybe might have schizophrenia. And that stands out to me because I would watch the show very often. And when I saw the criminals or the people that they were investigating talking about schizophrenia and showing this very amplified, in very many ways distorted, Hollywoodized perception of what schizophrenia is, it didn't resonate with me. I didn't think, like, reflect on myself, maybe I might have the same thing that this criminal or person that they're investigating and such. It took seeing one of the characters that I actually resonated a bit with. And what stood out to me on the film Words on Bathroom Walls was that the filmmakers reached out to advocates, reached out to community members living with psychosis. It was based off of what the director conveyed to us and such. So I can't really speak on behalf of the entire film creation or the staff and crew and such, but based off of what was said by the director. But the reaching out after the film was already made, ready to be released. They reached out to the nonprofit Students with Psychosis because they wanted to have a virtual film release with some of our students because this was back in, oh my goodness, I think 2020, 2021, throughout the pandemic, where really having a release in theaters wasn't doing so well because again it was really in the heart of the pandemic when the release was happening. So they're reaching out to advocates to help with this promotion of the film. And in my opinion, I find this very distasteful because if you're making a film that is for a community, Don't come to the community after you make the film for a thumbs up approval and help promoting it for ticket sales or streaming views. Make sure that you're involving community members day one that you are creating a film, because at the end of the day, if you're having a film that is representing a character from a community that is historically underrepresented, marginalized, you need to make sure that the creation of this character is centering community members with that lived experience perspective, not coming to them afterwards to help with that promotion and such. So that's a critique I have there. But with that said, I think that the movie Word and Bathroom Walls did do a very great job with showing that you have a character that's a character that you're rooting for. It shows very much in like a positive light the individual living on with schizophrenia, like how it's a young coming to age story, a student who is experiencing some of these symptoms and is affecting their education. So it's highlighting that important issue that people living with schizophrenia psychosis, it oftentimes happens where they're experiencing these symptoms oftentimes for the very first time, also trying to be a student, trying to go to school, and showing some of that struggle of their journey there. So I think the film does a great job with that. It also shows a bit of the struggle when it comes to the treatment journey as well. When it comes to finding a treatment option that works for you, it's not usually the first treatment option. It's oftentimes a long journey to find again what works for that individual. Another critique I have for that film is that film does use the names of particular medications in the film. With my personal opinion, I think that that is a bit negligent on the filmmaker's side of things, because it is important when it comes to talking about that conversation of what medications work or what don't work and side effects and such, to have that conversation with a doctor, with your doctor. And it's such a individual journey as well. I think that it can be problematic saying, oh, this medication didn't work on a film for like a wider audience. I would shy away from that for the reasons of it can discourage a person from potentially trying that treatment option, and that might be beneficial for them.
Absolutely agree. When these films are made about psychosis, any other mental illness or disability, those living with that specific disorder or that specific experience, these filmmakers should talk to people that are living with that experience so that when people living with the experience or illness, they will be able to see themselves in that film, but also so that there are accurate displays of what it's actually like to live with psychosis, a mental illness, or a disability. I remember watching Words on Bathroom Walls with two of my family members, and I remember scenes that show the character having symptoms, and I to my family members that everyone living with psychosis doesn't experience all of the symptoms, but also some of the symptoms, such as the hallucinations, were kind of exaggerated in the film. I also remember a scene in the movie where the young guy who's hospitalized after a psychotic break from not being on his meds, when he was hospitalized, he was strapped down to a hospital bed. That's a common thing that I see in films also. In what ways has the stigma of psychosis affected the way that you thought about yourself and your diagnosis?
When I think of stigma and think of internalized stigma, it's definitely shaped my perception of psychosis. I was uneducated about psychosis. I think that's when the stigma was at its climax. I did not know what to make of my illness, but I learned that stigma is reversible, such and recovery is possible. And the more we focus on recovery, on less stigma, the better off we will be able to treat psychosis and psychosis related disorders in the future. That's how I became more aware of the stigma, by looking at myself and try to change the outcome.
Yeah, when it came to opening up about my schizophrenia and psychosis, the stigma around it definitely was a barrier to wanting to seek that help, also a barrier to wanting to open up to people around me that I had schizophrenia. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia while in college. And even after my first hospitalization, most of the people, like my friend group, did not know that I had schizophrenia. It was really until my second hospitalization
It took me a while to disclose my diagnosis to friends or to people outside of my family because of stigma. And it also took me a while to seek treatment because of stigma. I encourage those who are experiencing psychosis or any other mental illness to seek help because you can't recover by yourself. In what positive ways has psychosis impacted your life or the way that you view the world?
Psychosis has definitely been one of my diagnosis or my understanding of psychosis, probably one of the milestones of my life in general. Having psychosis, I've learned that it's more common than people assume, and we are as normal as any other community because we have a keen sense of what lived experience looks like. And I believe my goal following my journey is to make sure that I'm taking care of myself and other people are doing the same, and making sure that the stigma is put to rest and we talk about hope, resiliency, and respect towards all communities, whether it's neurodivergent or neurotypical.
You mentioned resilience, and I definitely want to share through my journey of psychosis, or particularly schizophrenia and major depression. Living with psychosis has impacted me in more positive ways than negative. I've always been very empathetic, but after going through the experiences that I've had with psychosis, I've gained more empathy for people, for the world, and other people, not only sharing the same experience, but people who have many other different experiences. I've also gained resilience after every episode that I've had. I've learned and I've recovered and learned to keep living and find what helps me manage my symptoms. And throughout recovery, I've just gained so much insight on what psychosis is. I hope that by us talking about psychosis and sharing our experiences, many people find strength through it, and those who are experiencing psychosis can reach out for help.
Thank you, Lee, so much for those kind words there. And also, I want to say, like when it comes to students with psychosis, it's very much a team project. It's a team mission and such with our nonprofit. And I just want to say also, Lee, thanks for being part of the SWP. Thanks for being part of Students with Psychosis. Thanks for also being part of the behind the scenes as well. Go team. Again, it's so important that we have these discussions more and really helping with changing the perception, the global representation and perception of people living with psychosis.
I just want to thank you for having me. I'm glad I got to meet someone like you who also focuses their attention on advocacy work. I think that these kind of initiatives can make a great impact on many people. I hope our listeners understand the lived experience perspective and how we can change the face of internalized stigma, externalized stigma, and mental illness in general. I just want to thank you again.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode. If you or someone that you know are in crisis, please seek help and call 988 or speak with medical professionals. If you are a student living with psychosis, visit sws.ngo to join the Students with Psychosis support group. I'm your host, Lee Wade, and thank you for tuning in.